Hello everybody, and welcome back to the Anarchist audio library. Today we are going to be reading an original research article. The title is Hidden Nazi Past, Ole Ivar Lovaas During the German Occupation of Norway, written by Åsmund Borgen Gjerde from the University of Bergen, Norway. The abstract is, Ole Ivar Lovaas, a Norwegian-born professor of psychology at UCLA, is considered a pioneer in the development of interventions for autistic children based on applied behavior analysis. According to previous accounts, Lovaas and his family were forced farm workers during the German occupation of Norway between 1940 and 1945, when Lovaas was 13 to 18 years old. This article shows that the Lovaas family were in fact members of the collaborationist fascist party Nationalsamling. His father, Ernst Albert Lovaas, was a prominent leader in the propaganda apparatus of the German-installed fascist government. Ole Ivar Lovaas himself was an active participant in and a local leader of the fascist youth movement. The article concludes by comparing these revelations about Lovaas to previous similar revelations about another important figure in the history of autism, Hans Asperger. The research article begins. Ole Ivar Lovaas became famous in 1965. In May of that year, Life magazine published an article titled, quote, Screams, Slaps, and Love, a surprising, shocking treatment helps far-gone mental cripples, unquote, about Lovaas's work with autistic children at the University of California, Los Angeles. It featured pictures and descriptions of Lovaas administering electric shocks as a punishment for a 9-year-old girl when she refused to follow his directions, and of his assistant Bernard Perloff slapping a 7-year-old boy in the face as punishment for not paying attention during a, quote, speech lesson, unquote. Life magazine thus witnessed the early stages of Lovaas's experiments in using behaviorist methods with autistic children. Within a few years, an approach developed by Lovaas based on rewards and punishments was widely used, not least in his two home countries, the US and Norway. Following a hugely influential but never successfully replicated 1987 study, the, quote, Lovaas method, unquote, became even more widespread and developed a reputation for being scientific and evidence-based. Readers note there are citations in the text. Please click through the link in the description if you want to follow up on any of them and learn more. By this time, the method no longer employed electric shocks and severe physical violence. Lovaas's followers had discovered that milder punishments and a stronger emphasis on rewards were sufficiently effective that, quote, painful procedures like those administered in the early applications of aversive contingencies are no longer needed, unquote. Despite the discontinuation of the harshest forms of physical punishments, ABA interventions are now more controversial than ever because of criticism from emerging movements for autistic rights and neurodiversity. ABA interventions for autistic children have also been likened to, quote, conversion, unquote, therapies for queer people. In addition to his leading role in developing ABA for autistic children, Lovaas contributed to conversion therapies for gender non-conforming people through his participation in, quote, the Feminine Boy Project, unquote, in the 1970s. This, together with his prolific role as a proponent of physical punishments and more generally as a pioneer of ABA interventions for autistic children, have contributed to making Lovaas one of the most despised and controversial figures in the history of autism. Ole Ivar Lovaas died in 2010. In Norway, the country of his birth, he had never become well known to the general public, but he was revered by psychologists and social workers who considered themselves, quote, behavior analysts, unquote. In the US, he was enough of a national celebrity that some of the country's most influential newspapers published long obituaries of the UCLA professor. The New York Times and the Los Angeles Times both presented Lovaas as a pioneer in the development of treatments for autism, and both recounted a narrative of Lovaas's teenage years in German-occupied Norway. According to that narrative, Lovaas and his family were forced farm workers during the occupation. The present article uses Norwegian primary sources to reveal that Lovaas's actual experiences of German occupation were very different from the narrative that emerged later. The Lovaas family were not forced farm workers, but active members of the collaborationist Nazi party, Nationalsamling, or National Unity, NS. Ole Ivar Lovaas held a leading position in the local branch of the NS youth movement, while his father, Ernst Albert Lovaas, played a key role in the propaganda apparatus of the party and its regime at the national level. As an object of scholarly and journalistic history writing, autism and attempts at treating it started to gain traction around the time Ole Ivar Lovaas died. Lovaas is an important protagonist in this emerging literature, in which many contributions reproduce the narrative of Lovaas as a forced farm worker who had his ideas about human behavior shaped by observing the Nazi occupiers. He cites 3 different studies, Feinstein, Silberman, and Silverman here. One biographical article, however, uses Norwegian primary sources to reconstruct this period of Lovaas's life. This article shows that he was a school pupil during most of the occupation, despite the fact that nearly all previous accounts of Lovaas's teenage years claim that he and his family were forced farm workers during the occupation. The article strangely fails to make any reference to this claim. Ozerk et al., 2016. Whereas the primary sources used by Ozerk et al. Are character cards and interviews with 2 of Lovaas's classmates, the present article draws on newspaper articles as well as documents from the post-war police investigations for, quote, national treason, unquote, of Lovaas, his sister, and his parents, and from his father's trial for national treason, at the end of which he was sentenced to 4.5 years of forced labor. The modest aim of this article is to rewrite the history of Ole Ivar Lovaas's teenage years, not to provide new interpretations of the German occupation of Norway. It thus provides only a minimal account of historical information necessary to get an idea of the context in which these teenage years were lived. The first section discusses the available sources that shed light on Lovaas's career as a participant in and local leader of the collaborationist Nazi youth movement. The second section outlines the prominent career of Lovaas's father, Ernst Albert Lovaas, in the leadership of the Nazi propaganda apparatus, as well as the participation of his other family members in the collaborationist fascist movement. The third section discusses the establishment of the narrative of the Lovaas family as forced farm workers during the occupation, and asks how Ozerk et al. Could have failed, despite apparently making a significant effort to uncover the history of the family before and during the German occupation of Norway, to discover that the entire Lovaas family were Nazi collaborators. The fourth section considers the significance of the revelation of Ole Ivar Lovaas's Nazi past by comparing it to previous revelations about Hans Asperger, who played a similarly important role in the history of autism. Teenage collaborator. On the 8th of May 1945, Ole Ivar Lovaas turned 18 years old. He lived in Lier, a rural community just outside Drammen. Situated around 40 kilometers south of Oslo with just over 25,000 inhabitants, Drammen functioned as the capital of Buskerud County. Lovaas's 18th birthday was also the day on which Germany capitulated to the Allies. After 5 years, the occupation of Norway had ended. 3 days later, Lovaas was arrested for his membership in the collaborationist party Nationalsamling. NS was a fascist party founded by Vidkun Quisling in 1933. From the beginning, the party was ideologically related to Adolf Hitler's German Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterparty, NSDAP. Historian Hans Olaf Breivik has termed NS a Norwegian version of German National Socialism. Quisling was contacted in 1930 by the NSDAP Department of Foreign Affairs, which viewed Quisling as an important asset. According to Breivik, the sources are insufficient to determine the degree of contact and cooperation between the two parties in the years that followed. During 1939, Quisling visited Berlin several times, meeting twice with Hitler in December. During the meetings with Hitler and others, Quisling envisioned that NS would seize power in Norway with some form of aid from Germany. Quisling and Hitler discussed the possibility of a German occupation of Norway. Hitler promised Quisling that Germany would support NS economically, and immediately after their meeting, Hitler ordered his subordinates to begin researching the possibility of occupying Norway. The ideological similarity between NS and the NSDAP only grew stronger, especially after Germany occupied Norway in 1940 and banned all political parties except NS, which would play a key role in governing the country during the occupation. The party's anti-Semitism became more extreme and conspiratorial around the time Germany invaded the Soviet Union, thus coming to closely resemble the anti-Semitism of the NSDAP. NS had its own paramilitary organization, Hirden, modeled after the German Nazi Sturmabteilung SA and named after a medieval King's Guard. The party's youth branch, modeled after the German Hitler Youth, was called NS Ungdomsförstärkung. After the German capitulation in May 1945, the transition from a fascist occupation regime to a restored parliamentary democracy proceeded in a relatively orderly fashion. Throughout spring 1945, illegal networks anticipating liberation had gathered information on collaborators to be used for post-war prosecutions. And once the occupation ended, numerous people showed up at police stations to volunteer information about collaborators. On the 9th of May, the police started arresting collaborators based on a decree given by the Norwegian exile government in London in 1944. According to this decree, not only major acts of assisting the occupiers, but even membership in NS was punishable. On the day of his arrest, Ole Ivar Lovaas signed a statement saying he had joined NS in 1941, but not been active in the movement aside from attending meetings. After being interviewed, Lovaas was released. On the 13th of July 1945, the chief of police in Drammen decided Lovaas would be prosecuted for his membership of NS. The police department did not continue investigating Ole Ivar Lovaas until November 1945 when they interviewed him again. In this interview, Lovaas explained that he had been a member of Gute Hirden and that its activities had been similar to what one would see in the Scout movement. NSUF and all its local chapters were divided into 4 branches according to gender and age. Despite being named after Hirden, the 4 branches of NSUF were not under its command. They were Smahirden for girls between 10 and 14, Gute Hirden for boys between 10 and 14, Gente Hirden for girls between 14 and 18, and Unghirden for boys between 14 and 18. Source: Borge, 1995. As Lovaas remained a member of the movement until shortly before his 18th birthday, it seemed likely he would have been transferred from Gute Hirden to Unghirden, but this is not mentioned in the transcripts of his police interviews. In November 1945, the Director of Public Prosecutions decreed that people who had left NS before they turned 18 or had not yet turned 18 during the war should not be prosecuted. In his police interviews, Lovaas had explained that he had informed the party in writing in March 1945 that he wanted to leave. His stated reason was that he did not want the obligations that came with the senior membership that one automatically received upon turning 18. He also told the police that he never received any confirmation that his resignation had been approved, and the police did not get confirmation from elsewhere that he had in fact attempted to leave the party in March 1945. As Lovaas turned 18 on the day that war ended, and it was unclear whether he had left NS, it may also have been unclear whether the decree from the Director of Public Prosecutions should apply to his case. However, the Drammen Police Department interpreted the situation as though the decree applied to Lovaas, and on the 1st of December 1945 they informed him that in accordance with the new decree, he would not be prosecuted. Due to this decision, the case file on Ole Ivar Lovaas is rather slim, as he was not investigated beyond the 2 interviews conducted with him. It does, however, also contain documents from a different investigation opened after the case against Lovaas himself was closed. The investigation in question was opened by the police department at Lillestrøm. While Lier, where Lovaas lived, is situated just southwest of Oslo, Lillestrøm is just northeast of the capital. In late autumn 1946, Lillestrøm Police Department started investigating the NS Førerskole, or Führer School, at Jessheim nearby, at which prospective NSUF leaders, among others, were educated. The beginning of the German occupation in 1940 had seen an explosion of the number of members in the NS youth organizations. Moreover, many of the most committed members volunteered for the German war effort. This created an acute shortage of leaders on all levels of the organization, which, aided by the German Hitler Youth, began frantically educating new leaders. Out of all the courses and institutions that educated fascist youth leaders, the Führer School at Jessheim was considered the most prestigious. In the summer of 1942, this school organized 2 6-week courses for local leaders in the NS youth organizations. While investigating the Führer School and its students, investigators from Lillestrøm Police Department found that Ole Ivar Lovaas had participated in one of these courses. Moreover, they found that at a ceremony to mark the end of the course, he had been appointed Führer of a local chapter of Guttehirden, the NS organization for boys between the ages of 10 and 14. Lovaas himself was 15 years old at the time. It would probably have been normal for a leader to have been a few years older than the children he led. This could mean Lovaas told the truth in his police interview when he only mentioned being a member of Guttehirden, not Unghirden, which was for boys between 14 and 18. Given that Lovaas remained a member of NSUF at least until March 1945, and that there was a severe shortage of leaders, it would be very unlikely if Lovaas did not serve as a local leader of Guttehirden, considering he participated in a summer course with that purpose, and was officially appointed to such a position at the end of the course. That would also mean Lovaas lied in his police interviews when he claimed he had not been active in the movement beyond attending meetings. Unfortunately, this cannot be confirmed by consulting the movement's own archives, as no organizational archive materials from NS youth organizations in Leer have been preserved. There are, however, other sources that can shed some additional light on Lovaas's activities as a Nazi collaborator. On 11th of March 1943, the newspaper Drammens Tidend published a short article titled Leer NSUF Making Great Progress. Its first lines read, quote, "If anyone doubted whether the NS youth is capable of more than marching and showing off their nice uniforms in the streets, the doubts would have evaporated after witnessing the Comrades' Night at Haugstad on Tuesday." Led by a 14-year-old girl, Betty Skogen, and a 15-year-old boy, Ivar Lovaas, it turned out to be one of the best NSUF meetings held this winter, pulled off with a precision and a program that will not be easy to match. Unquote. From Leer NSUF I Sterk Framgang, 1943. It is extremely unlikely that Ivar Lovaas referred to someone other than the person later known as Ole Ivar Lovaas, who was 15 years old in March 1943. The term Comrades' Night was commonly used within NS. It often referred to a semi-private gathering of members meant to increase internal coherence. However, Comrades' Nights could also be of a more public character, aiming to recruit new members. This was likely the case with the one led by Lovaas and Betty Skogen in March 1943, and not only because it was reported on by the most widely distributed national newspaper. One of the speakers at the event was Ragnvald Roed, a county leader of the NS youth organizations. In October 1942, he had distributed a propaganda plan to his subordinate in the county, of which Lovaas would have been one, ordering them to organize Comrades' Nights where they would invite non-members with the aim of recruiting them. Elizabeth Betty Skogen, who led the Comrades' Night together with Lovaas, left Norway shortly after the war, staying for more than 20 years in France and Paraguay before returning to Norway as a marketing representative of a multinational cosmetics company. In 1981, she appeared in a 4-part documentary on Norwegian television that presented the perspectives of former collaborators on the period of German occupation. In 1982, she published a memoir of her experiences before, during, and after the war. Both in the documentary series and in the memoir, she portrayed life in the fascist youth movement as innocent and akin to scouting, a portrayal for which she was harshly criticized. Like Lovaas, Skogen attended leadership courses, and when the former leader of Smahirden, the NS organization for girls between 10 and 14 years, left to volunteer for the German occupation authorities in Poland, the position was given to Elizabeth Skogen. Although she does not use his full name, one passage in her memoir is very likely to be about Ole Ivar Lovaas. In a description of a social event for members of NS youth organizations, she writes, quote, "The music? Ole provided that, as he was the only one who could master a few little pieces on the violin. White and trembling, he stood in the background fiddling, horribly raspy." Unquote. The Ole that Skogen refers to seems likely to have been Lovaas, as we know he admitted to attending NS youth meetings and he played the violin, from Ozerk et al. And Silberman. According to Skogen, she first came into contact with the fascist youth movement when an older girl telephoned her early in 1941 to invite her to a sporting event in Lillehammer, organized by NSUF and termed, quote, Winter Games, unquote. She accepted the invitation, and the experience thrilled her despite having no talent for skiing and the living conditions being sordid. It was the camaraderie that attracted her, and once she got back home, she applied to join Smahirden. Ole Ivar Lovaas was also at the competition in Lillehammer. According to newspaper reports, he came fourth in the slalom competition for boys between 12 and 14 years old. NSUF Ungdommen for Norsk Idrett Videre, 1941. Unlike Skogen, Lovaas was already a member at the time of the competition in Lillehammer in April 1941. The youths who competed in skiing at Lillehammer received several prominent visitors, including NS leader Vidkun Quisling, head of the German occupation authorities Josef Terboven, the NS Minister for Work and Sports, Axel Heiberg-Stang, and a German envoy from the Hitler Youth by the name of Karl Petter, who acted as an advisor for NSUF. Before the competition started, the participants marched through the streets of Lillehammer. As already mentioned, Elizabeth Skogen presents the fascist youth movement in Lier during the occupation as peaceful and innocent. A recent book about Lier during the occupation, written by a local historian and based on numerous diaries and later recollections, paints a different picture. Here, the young fascists appear to have acted violently and aggressively on several occasions. One incident occurred in April 1941, 1 month after Ole Ivar Lovaas joined the movement. A diary from that time describes how young fascists were beating up people and violently threatening others into leaving a particular area. The diary describes the perpetrators as being members of Smahirden. That, however, is probably not correct, as Smahirden was the NS organization for girls aged between 10 and 14. It is probably more likely that the troublemakers were members of Gutteherden for boys between 10 and 14, or Ungherden for boys between 14 and 18. Ole Ivar Lovaas's 14th birthday was on the 8th of May, 1941. The family. While Ole Ivar Lovaas's actions during the war must be gleaned from only a few documents, the same is not true of his father, Ernst Albert Lovaas, whose actions during the war left numerous sources. Ozerk et al. In their biographical article on Lovaas also recount parts of his father's life, from his birth in 1886 to working as a watchmaker at age 14, working at a cellulose factory 1 decade later, becoming an active member of the labor movement, and then working as a journalist in various local labor newspapers. They make no mention, however, of Ernst Albert Lovaas's career after 1922. Ozerk et al. This is curious considering that he would later rise to considerable fame. In 1923, Ernst Albert Lovaas left the labor movement following a major conflict that saw the movement split into 3 parties. He would not join another political party until 1940. In 1924, he started working as a journalist for Dagbladet, a left-liberal newspaper that was one of the most widely read in the country. In 1938, however, he began publishing polemical political articles in other newspapers. These articles espoused views that differed significantly from those of the movement he had left 15 years earlier. In several articles published during autumn 1938 in Nationen, a far-right newspaper owned by the Norwegian Farmers Association, which regularly published anti-Semitic content, Lovaas argued that democracy was incapable of solving the most pressing issue of the day. The issue he had in mind was youth unemployment. As a solution, he proposed a, quote, law on work service, unquote, that would require everyone to work for a certain amount of time and would grant everyone the right to paid work after completion of the work service. The idea of mandatory work service had been central to NS from when the party was founded, and it was the main cause of its youth wing, NSUF. Lovaas combined his argument for a law on work service with a call for, quote, stronger discipline, unquote. According to him, quote, a nation without discipline is like a boat without a helm, unquote. Moreover, he criticized fellow Norwegians for being too critical of Hitler's Germany. as the German dictatorship had proven far better than Norway and other democracies at exploiting the productive powers of its youth. Lovaas thought, quote, "We certainly have no right whatsoever to taunt such a nation and its political system so long as we ourselves are letting our best youth go under within our own borders," unquote. In his final Nationen article of 1938, Lovaas warned that there were more Nazis in the country than people realized, and that if they attempted to seize power, quote, "the disappointed hordes of youth will be at the fore among the enemies of democracy," unquote. Lovaas's final political article of 1938 appeared in Fredrikstad Dagblad. Here his main argument was that Norwegians failed to look objectively at events in Germany. He praised the German dictatorship for the way it exploited its productive forces and argued that its actions reflected the will of the German people. This German success, he implied, should have consequences for other countries. Quote, "It looks like the democratic and liberalist system has had its day in several countries. The question then is only how the new system will look and how the transition will play out. Germany has chosen its system. Russia struggles with its system, and the other nations will eventually have to take their turn. We are living in interesting times, even though the new invention we are witnessing is incredibly brutal. We ourselves, in Norway, will quite certainly also need to take our turn. The disintegrative tendencies caused by a lack of discipline are clearly appearing, while at the same time our country's productive forces are not capable of meeting the ever-increasing demands." Unquote. From Lovaas, 1938. This could be read as implying that democracy in Norway would soon come to an end and be replaced by a system resembling the German Nazi dictatorship, and that this would be a good thing, considering Germany's superior handling of its workforce. Less than a year and a half later, democracy in Norway did indeed end, albeit not because of an internal process, as Lovaas had seemed to envision, but because of a German invasion on the 9th of April 1940. Oslo and Bergen fell immediately, and the government evacuated northwards. By summer, German forces had conquered the entire country and the government fled to Britain. During spring and summer, the occupation authorities negotiated with members of the parliament, Stortinget, about how Norway would be governed under German occupation. The negotiations did not yield any agreement, and on the 25th of September 1940, Joseph Terboven, the head of the German occupation authorities, dictated a new order. No political parties would be allowed to function except one, the pro-German fascist party, NS. Just prior to the announcement of the new order on the 22nd of September, Ernst Albert Lovaas had applied for NS membership. In January 1941, Lovaas was granted leave from his position at Dagbladet and accepted a position as, quote, "political editor," unquote, of Norsk Artikkeltjeneste, a newly founded agency that would distribute articles to hundreds of Norwegian newspapers that would be pressured into publishing them. As political editor, Lovaas's job was to ensure the articles conformed to the ideological tenets of Nazism. He thus became one of the country's most important and influential Nazi propagandists. Most newspapers were allowed to keep publishing with the same journalists and editors as before the war, so long as they refrained from criticizing NS and the occupation authorities. The majority of the content in most newspapers therefore became largely, quote, apolitical, unquote, neither supporting nor criticizing Nazism and the occupation. Norsk Artikkeltjeneste then was perhaps the most important instrument of ideological Nazification. By forcing newspapers to publish its ideologically tailored articles, NS and the occupation authorities used Norsk Artikkeltjeneste to influence the minds of the populace to accept a Manichaean worldview in which a powerful Jewish conspiracy was the enemy of all mankind. Wesley, 2019. Shortly after accepting the position as political editor, Lovaas also accepted an invitation to join NS Kamporganisasjonen, a group of the most ideologically committed Nazis within the movement. From summer 1941 until February 1944, Lovaas held positions as, quote, propaganda leader, unquote, and, quote, ideological leader, unquote, in the party. He also functioned as, quote, national speaker, unquote, and held several talks on national radio and at various events. In addition to ensuring the ideological conformity of others, Ernst Albert Lovaas wrote several articles and talks himself. He gave his first radio talk in December 1940. It was titled, quote, "The Labor Movement and the Anti-Comintern Pact," unquote, and was an attempt to explain what had gone wrong for the international labor movement such that it now failed to support the only true emancipatory movement, National Socialism. This, he explained, was due to the influence of, quote, "Jewish philosophers," unquote, over the labor movement and to the fact that the Soviet Union and the, quote, "Red Internationals," unquote, were controlled by, quote, "international Jewry," unquote. He apparently wanted listeners to understand that NS, rather than the Labour Party, which had governed Norway for 5 years prior to the German occupation, was the true representative of Norwegian workers. In order to avoid the pitfalls that had ruined the international labor movement, he said that NS wanted to, quote, "seek cooperation with our own people's tribe, the Germanic, and fiercely combat any mixing of blood with other races. This explains why we struggle against the Jews' bastardization of our strong people," unquote. In February 1942, several newspapers printed an article by Lovaas where he praised those Norwegian youths who had volunteered to participate in the German invasion of the Soviet Union and scolded those Norwegians who failed to appreciate the sacrifices these soldiers made. I think I'll stop there for right now. I don't think we need to necessarily read more. Pretty obvious that this is not necessarily the guy that we want to be basing our understandings of neurodiversity around.